The trail disappeared beneath my boots, and panic swallowed every breath I took. 3 hours lost. No signal. Darkness creeping through the pines around me. Then I heard footsteps, steady, unhurried. Like someone who already knew where I was. It was her. The quiet woman from accounting nobody at work ever noticed. "I've been looking for you since the moment you disappeared," she said softly. I didn't know it yet. But she'd been watching me long before that trail. What she told me next changed everything I thought I knew about myself. And somewhere back at camp, my fiancé had no idea what was coming. My name is Dana Whitfield, 29. A marketing coordinator at a mid-sized software company in Denver, Colorado. Engaged to a steady, practical man named Chase. Life felt arranged like furniture in a showroom, tidy, expected, comfortable. Until our company announced a mandatory 3-day wilderness retreat in the Rocky Mountains that fall. I dreaded the retreat. Group hikes, trust falls, forced enthusiasm. None of it matched my idea of a good weekend away from spreadsheets. Jordan Reyes worked in accounting, 2 floors below me. I knew her name only from company emails, never her face up close. She was quiet at orientation, put up, watching the mountains instead of the icebreaker games our HR director insisted we play. On day 2, our group split for a supervised hike. I lagged behind, distracted by a photo I was framing on my phone. When I looked up, the trail markers were gone, and so was every voice from my group, swallowed by wind and pine. Called out. Nothing answered but an echo and the creak of branches bending under a sky turning gray too fast. 2 hours passed. My phone had no signal. My water bottle was empty, and my comm had long since abandoned me. Then I heard it, footsteps that weren't panicked like mine, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Jordan stepped through the brush like she belonged there, compass in one hand, my name already forming on her lips. "You're Dana, right?" "Marketing," she said, like we were meeting at the coffee cart instead of a darkening forest. I nearly cried with relief. She didn't make a big deal of it. Just handed me her water and started walking. "How did you even find me?" I asked. She shrugged. "I noticed you weren't with the group 20 minutes before anyone else did." Something about that sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Tucked away like a secret I hadn't earned yet. The walk back took 40 minutes. Though it felt shorter with Jordan narrating the trail like she'd memorized every route and rock. "I used to guide backpacking trips in Wyoming," she admitted. Almost embarrassed. Like it was a strange thing to confess to a marketing coordinator. When we reached camp, the search coordinator was mid-sentence into a walkie-talkie. Jordan just handed me off and slipped back into the crowd. Chase called that night, worried after hearing rumors of a situation on the trail. I told him I was fine and left out the rest. I couldn't stop replaying it, not the fear, but the calm in Jordan's voice. Steady as if getting lost happened to her daily. The next morning at breakfast, Jordan sat 2 tables away, laughing quietly at something on her own, never once looking my direction. I found myself annoyed by that, which annoyed me further, because I had no business caring where an accountant from another floor chose to sit. On the bus ride home, she ended up in the seat behind mine. We talked for 3 hours about nothing that mattered and everything that did. She told me about growing up outside Missoula, her dad's hardware store, and the year she spent working trail crews before accounting felt safer. I told her about Chase, our 5-year relationship, the ring I'd said yes to 8 months earlier without much hesitation either way. She only nodded at that, her expression unreadable, and changed the subject to the best diners along I-70 before we reached Denver. Back at the office, I found myself taking the stairs past the 2nd floor more often than my job ever required. One Tuesday, I accidentally ran into her by the elevator. She smiled like she'd been expecting it, which somehow made it worse. "You looking for someone?" she asked, arms crossed, eyes amused in a way that made my explanation sound thinner than I wanted. I mumbled something about a budget report and fled toward my desk, cheeks burning for reasons I refused to examine that day. It became a pattern: brief hallway conversations, a shared elevator, a coffee run time just a little too conveniently for coincidence. My coworker Brittany noticed first. "You've been smiling a lot since the retreat," she said, studying me over her cubicle wall. "Must be the mountain air," I said, and she laughed, though her eyes lingered a second too long on my face. Jordan started leaving sticky notes on my desk when I wasn't there: trail recommendations, corny puns about spreadsheets. Nothing that meant anything. Except they did mean something, because I kept every single one in the bottom drawer where Chase would never think to look. We started eating lunch together on Fridays, just the two of us, at a taco truck 2 blocks from the office. She had a way of listening that made me talk longer than I meant to, about things I hadn't told anyone in years. I told her about my mother, a church deacon in Colorado Springs, and how every choice I'd made felt shaped by her approval. Jordan just listened, quiet and careful, until I finished, then said simply, "That sounds exhausting to carry every single day." No one had ever said that to me before. Chase called my mother intense. Jordan called it what it actually was. I started noticing things: the small scar above her eyebrow, the way she hummed old country songs while filing paperwork. I told myself it was friendship, the kind that happens fast after a shared crisis. Nothing more complicated than gratitude and proximity. But friendship didn't explain why I checked my phone every few minutes on the days she didn't text first. Chase proposed we set a wedding date that spring. I said let's talk about it later for the 3rd week running. He didn't push. That was Chase: steady, patient. Never one to chase down a feeling he couldn't quite name either. One evening Jordan invited me to a bouldering gym, insisting everyone needed one reckless hobby unrelated to quarterly earnings reports. I was terrible at it, laughing more than climbing, and she caught me once when my grip slipped near the top. Our faces were close for 1 second too long before she set me down and stepped back, clearing her throat. "Sorry," she said, though I wasn't sure what exactly she was apologizing for. And neither, apparently, was she. That night I lay awake replaying that second, the warmth of her hands, longer than I'd replayed anything about Chase in months. I started making excuses to stay late at work, just in case Jordan's floor still had its lights on too. Sometimes it did. We'd walk to the parking garage together, talking slower than the distance actually required. She never made a move, never said anything that crossed a line, but her eyes said something her mouth never dared. I began dreaming about her. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary scenes. Her laughing across a kitchen table that wasn't mine or hers. I woke from one such dream with my heart pounding and a guilt I couldn't name pressing on my chest. Chase asked if something was wrong. I said I was just stressed about work, which wasn't exactly a lie. Jordan and I started a running joke text thread, mostly memes, but underneath it felt like something being carefully built. On my birthday, she left a small succulent on my desk with a note, something that survives without much water. "Like you." I laughed until I nearly cried, then hid the plant in a drawer before Chase came to pick me up for dinner. That night, blowing out candles at a restaurant Chase chose, I made a wish I refused to admit even to myself. Brittany cornered me by the printer the next week. "You two seem close," she said, eyebrows raised. Not quite a question. "We're friends," I said too quickly, and Brittany's small smile told me she didn't believe a word of it. Jordan and I hiked again that summer. Just the two of us this time. No lost trail. No emergency. Just choice. At the summit, she turned to me and said, "I think about that day in the woods more than I should." My heart lurched. "Why?" asked, though some part of me already suspected, maybe already knew the answer. "Because for one afternoon," she said quietly, "I got to be the person you needed. I haven't stopped wanting that since." I didn't answer. I just stood there, wind pulling at my jacket, feeling something inside me quietly, irreversibly shift. I didn't say anything on the mountain. I just hugged her. Too long. Too tight. And neither of us pulled away first. Driving home, I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached, terrified of a feeling I no longer had a name for. That night I couldn't look at my engagement ring without a knot forming somewhere between my ribs and my throat. I avoided Jordan for a week, taking the long way to the printer, skipping our usual Friday taco truck lunch. She texted once. Did I say something wrong? I stared at it for 20 minutes before typing no. Just busy, and deleting it twice. Chase noticed my distance and blamed the wedding planning, suggesting we hire a coordinator to take the pressure off me. I agreed, mostly because arguing required an honesty I wasn't ready to give him, or myself, or anyone at all. My mother called that Sunday, asking about venues, flowers, whether I'd chosen a photographer yet for the engagement shoot. Everything's on track, I lied, staring at the succulent Jordan gave me, still alive despite my careless neglect of it. Jordan finally cornered me in the break room. Did I misread something? She asked, voice low. Guard clearly back up. No, I said. It's complicated, which was the truth wrapped in a coward's phrasing, and we both knew it. I get it, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't. Not really. Not when it mattered most to her. She told me then, quietly, about her ex-wife Renee, and the marriage that ended when Renee's parents refused to attend their wedding. They didn't come to the funeral either, Jordan said flatly. When Renee's mother died, still couldn't stand to be near me. Renee had eventually chosen her family's approval over their marriage, moving back to Ohio, leaving divorce papers instead of a goodbye. I don't do half relationships anymore, Jordan said. I can't be someone's secret again. I did that once. It nearly broke me. I understood then why she'd kept her distance despite the summit, why she never pushed further than a note or a joke. I wanted to tell her everything, my confusion, my fear. The ring that suddenly felt like a stranger's hand on mine. Instead I said, I need time, and watched something close behind her eyes, like a door quietly, carefully latching shut. Brittany, meanwhile, had seen us in the break room, arms too close, voices too low for an ordinary work conversation. She mentioned it to another coworker at happy hour, framing it as harmless gossip, the kind that spreads faster than any memo. By Monday, whispers followed me down hallways I used to walk without a second thought about who was watching. Chase heard nothing yet, but my mother called with an odd tone, asking if everything was still fine between us. I assured her it was, though the lie sat heavier each time I repeated it, like sediment settling at the bottom of a glass. I threw myself into wedding planning that month, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, anything to drown the noise inside my own head. Jordan stopped leaving notes. Our elevator meetings became polite nods instead of conversation. Professional distance rebuilt brick by careful brick. I told myself this was better, safer. The responsible choice a grown woman with a fiancé and a mother like mine should make. But safer didn't explain the ache that settled in whenever I passed the second floor and didn't see her desk light on. One night, unable to sleep, I drove past the bouldering gym, half hoping, half dreading that her car would be there. It was. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine off, before finally driving home without ever going inside. Chase found the succulent while looking for a phone charger in my desk drawer, and asked, simply, "Where'd this come from?" "A coworker," I said, which was true and also somehow the biggest lie I'd told him in 5 years together. He didn't push, trusting me the way he always had, and that trust suddenly felt like something I was actively betraying. I started therapy that week, telling myself it was wedding stress, though the session circled back to Jordan more than I planned. My therapist asked gently if I'd ever questioned my sexuality before. I said no. though even saying it felt oddly untrue. I thought about high school. A friend named Kayla I'd cried over losing touch with more than any breakup since. I thought about how I'd never quite felt what movies promise love should feel like. Not with Chase. Not with anyone. Until the woods. My mother, sensing something in my voice during our calls, began quoting scripture more pointedly, reminding me what family was supposed to mean. God has a plan for your marriage, she said once, unprompted. Like she'd overheard a conversation I never had aloud. I wondered, not for the first time, how much of my life had been built to satisfy a plan that was never truly mine. Jordan requested a floor transfer that month, citing career growth, though I suspected it had far less to do with her career. HR approved it. Her desk on the second floor sat empty within 2 weeks, replaced by someone whose name I never bothered learning. I found out from Brittany, who delivered the news with a look that was somehow both sympathetic and quietly triumphant. Guess your little friendship ran its course, she said. And I hated how accurate, and how cruel, that sentence turned out to be. I texted Jordan that night. You didn't have to leave, she replied hours later. I think I really did. Though. I didn't reply. I just sat with the ring on my finger, feeling for the first time how little it weighed compared to everything else. Wedding planning continued around me like weather I couldn't control, tasting menus, seating charts. A mother's growing, insistent excitement. Chase asked if I was happy. I said yes, and for a moment I almost believed the shape of my own voice. I ran into Jordan once more, by accident, at a grocery store 2 neighborhoods from either of our apartments. We stood in the cereal aisle, saying nothing important, both of us too aware of how much we were leaving unsaid. Congratulations, she said, glancing at my ring. Voice careful. Controlled. The way you speak about something you've already grieved. I drove home that night and cried in my car for 40 minutes before I trusted myself to walk inside. 3 weeks before the wedding, Brittany called me into an empty conference room, her expression sharper than I'd ever seen it. I saw the texts, she said, sliding her phone across the table. A screenshot of my message to Jordan glowing on the screen. My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized my phone had synced to a shared work laptop during a system update months earlier. What do you want? Asked, voice shaking. Already calculating every possible way this could unravel everything I'd built. Nothing. Yet, Brittany said. But Chase deserves to know who he's actually marrying. Don't you think? Before it's too late. I begged her to stay quiet. Hating myself for begging. Hating her more for enjoying the power she suddenly held over me. She agreed. For now. Though her silence felt less like mercy and more like a countdown clock I couldn't see. I called Jordan that night for the first time in months, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone twice. Someone knows, I said, and explained everything. The text. Brittany. The fragile wall I'd built now cracking at its base. I'm sorry, Jordan said, and I could hear in her voice she meant it, though there was nothing left for her to apologize for. This isn't your fault, I told her. None of this was ever your fault, and for the first time, I fully believed it. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, Dana, what do you actually want? Not what's easiest. What do you want? I didn't have an answer. Not one I could say aloud. Not with a wedding invitation already sitting in my mother's mailbox. 2 days later, Chase found out anyway, not from Brittany, but from a photo someone had posted from the bouldering gym months earlier. His face when he confronted me wasn't angry, just confused. Hurt in a way that made everything feel worse than shouting would have. Is there someone else? He asked. And I realized I'd never actually lied to his face until that exact moment. I don't know what this is, I said, which was truer than any denial, though it broke him just the same. He asked if I'd ever really loved him, and I hesitated too long before answering, which was, in itself, its own confession. That night he moved out of our shared apartment, taking only a bag, saying he needed space to think before deciding anything. My mother heard within the week, from an aunt who'd heard from Chase's mother, the news spreading faster than any wildfire that summer. She called, voice trembling with a fury I'd never once heard from her, demanding I explain what exactly I'd done. I think I might be gay. Mom, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I'd fully decided to say them at all. Silence stretched across the line for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 10 unbearable seconds. This is not who you are, she finally said. This is a phase. A mistake. Something you can still walk back from. It's not a mistake, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded despite my hands shaking violently. She hung up without saying goodbye. The first time in 29 years she'd ended a call that way. I sat on my kitchen floor for an hour, phone in my lap, waiting for a call back that never came that night. Jordan showed up at my door unannounced the next morning, holding coffee, saying nothing, just letting me fall apart against her shoulder. I'm losing everyone, I whispered, and she pulled back just enough to look at me, steady as she'd been in those woods. You're not losing everyone, she said. You're finding out who was actually ever really there for you in the first place. My father called a week later, quieter than my mother, saying he loved me but needed time to understand things properly. I told him that was fair, that I needed time too, though hearing it still landed like a small, private wound. Meanwhile, Jordan received a job offer from a firm in Seattle, better pay. A fresh start far from Denver's small world gossip. She told me almost apologetically, like she was confessing something shameful instead of an achievement she'd worked years toward. You should take it, I said, though every word tasted like ash leaving my mouth as I forced myself to say it. Should I? She asked, watching me carefully, clearly hoping I'd say something entirely different than what I actually said. I didn't answer directly. I was still too tangled in wedding cancellations, family silence, and a life unraveling faster than I could process. Brittany, sensing the scandal had already broken without her help, backed off entirely, though the damage to my reputation at work lingered. My manager called me in for a check-in, careful corporate language for making sure I wasn't a liability to company culture. I assured her I was fine, professional, focused, though my personal life had clearly become office conversation whether I liked it or not. Chase texted once, asking only, "Is it Jordan?" I stared at the message a long time before typing back a single word. Yes. He didn't reply again. Weeks later I learned, almost as a footnote, that he'd been quietly seeing someone from his gym for months. It didn't erase my guilt, but it softened something in me, knowing the ending had perhaps already been written before I ever met Jordan. My mother finally called again, still cold, asking if I'd at least consider counseling with our pastor before doing anything permanent. I told her, gently but firmly, that I loved her. But this wasn't a decision open for negotiation or church intervention. She cried on the phone, the first tears I'd heard from her in years, though I couldn't tell if they were for me or for herself. Jordan's Seattle start date crept closer. She stopped mentioning it, as if silence might somehow slow down the calendar itself. I found myself standing outside her apartment one evening, keys still in hand, unsure if I'd come to say goodbye or something else entirely. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd sensed me there the same way she'd once sensed me lost in the woods. "I don't want you to go," I said, finally, the truth arriving 3 months later than it probably should have. "Then tell me that's not just fear talking," she said, "because I can't build another life around someone else's uncertainty again." I didn't have a perfect answer that night, only the certainty that losing her would hurt more than losing anything else I'd already lost. I went home that night and looked, really looked, at the life I'd built to please everyone except the person living it. I called my mother the next morning, calm this time, and told her I was flying to Seattle, not to escape, but to choose. I can't promise you'll understand, I said, but I need you to know I'm not broken. And I'm not lost anymore. She was quiet, then said something I never expected. Your grandmother left the church once too. For a woman she never got to marry. I sat frozen. The phone pressed hard against my ear. Hearing a family secret older than any I'd ever imagined existed. She never told me directly, my mother admitted. But I found letters after she passed. I've carried that silence for 30 years. Why didn't you ever tell me? Asked. And she said simply, because I was afraid of exactly this conversation happening. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door cracking open where I'd expected only a locked, unmovable wall. Jordan's flight to Seattle was in 4 days. I booked one too. Not to stop her, but to finally say everything out loud. I told my job I needed personal leave. My manager, surprisingly kind, said, go. We'll figure the rest out later. On the flight, I rehearsed 100 versions of what to say, none of them feeling big enough for what I actually meant. I landed and drove straight to the address she'd once mentioned in passing, a small apartment near a firm she hadn't started yet. She opened the door in packing clothes, boxes stacked behind her, surprise breaking across her face like sunlight through storm clouds. Dana? What are you doing here? She asked, voice caught somewhere between hope and the fear of hoping too soon. I came to tell you I'm not afraid anymore, I said. Not of my mother. Not of Denver. Not of loving you. I told my mom everything, I continued. I broke off the engagement months ago, but I never told you I was ready, until now. Jordan set down the box in her hands, slow, careful. Like she needed a second to believe I was actually standing there. I can't keep chasing someone who might change her mind, she said, though her voice had softened past its earlier defenses. I'm not asking you to chase me, I said. I'm asking if there's still room for me in whatever you're building here. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled me into a hug so tight, I finally understood what safety was supposed to feel like. I've been waiting for this since the woods, she admitted against my shoulder. Longer than I probably should have let myself wait. We stood there a long time, boxes half-packed around us, neither of us in a hurry to let go of the other. I'm still figuring out the job, she said eventually, laughing. But I think Denver might need one more accountant back home. Actually, I offered to help her unpack the Seattle apartment first anyway, just to prove I meant what I'd flown 2 states to say. We spent that weekend walking Pike Place Market, talking about everything we'd been too afraid to say over the past year. She told me she'd almost turned down Seattle twice already, hoping some version of me would show up before she had to leave. I told her about Brittany, my mother's letters revelation, the strange relief of finally living a life that felt fully, honestly mine. On our last night there, she asked if I regretted any of it, the wedding, the fallout, the year of silence between us. I regret waiting so long, I said, but I don't regret a single choice that led me back to standing in this kitchen. Jordan ultimately declined the Seattle position, choosing instead a firm in Denver that offered flexible remote work 3 days a week. My mother, months later, sent a card, not an apology exactly, but an invitation to Sunday dinner. Jordan's name included on it. I cried reading it. Not from pain this time, but from the strange, cautious relief of a door finally, fully opening. Chase, unexpectedly, texted congratulations after hearing through mutual friends, adding that he hoped I'd finally found the honest version of my life. Brittany transferred departments that fall. We never spoke about the conference room again. And honestly, I never needed to. My father came to Sunday dinner too, quiet as ever. But he shook Jordan's hand and called her by name without hesitation. My mother never mentioned her own mother's letters again. But she kept a photo of my grandmother on the mantle from then on. A year after that lost trail in the mountains, Jordan and I hiked the same path again, just to remember where it all began. At the exact spot she'd found me, she pulled a small box from her backpack. No speech prepared, just her steady, familiar voice. "I got lost with you once," she said, "and found exactly where I was supposed to be. Marry me." Dana Whitfield. I said yes before she even finished the sentence, laughing through tears in the same forest that had quietly rewritten my entire life. We got married the following spring, my mother in the front row, and for the first time in years, every part of me felt completely, unapologetically home. Andy.